Welcome to the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This podcast is dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like all the best bookshops, this podcast is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. So tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book at the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. I'm Stacey Horan, author, book lover, and host of the Bookshop at the End of the Internet. This is episode number 248. For more information about this or any of our episodes, go to my website, staceyhoran.com. If you enjoy the podcast, leave us a review, like us on social media, and share us with your friends, family, and fellow readers. In today's episode of The Bookshop at the End of the Internet, I'm chatting with author Peter Gribble about his new City of Magicians series. The first 3 books in the series, Threat, Within, and Quickening, are available now, and Peter is hard at work on books 4 through 6. In this fantasy series, a society built on intellect and pacifism is forced to confront a brute force barbarian invasion. Can the society survive? Peter's stories challenge the ideas of war, power, and the control of knowledge as a weapon. He was inspired by his early childhood spent in France, where he was taught never to speak about World War II. This silence about the war and the practice of ignoring history's lessons unsettled him, and he decided to finally address it decades later by writing his City of Magicians series. In this episode, I'll chat with Peter about his writing journey, the extent of his world building, which included creating his own hieroglyphics and sign language, and how he found legitimacy for his fictional stories in the biographies and memoirs of former world leaders, as well as a few other things. Coming up. Peter Gribble, I want to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast.
Thanks very much for having me.
I thought what we could do today is start by talking about your new series, the City of Magicians trilogy. If you don't mind, tell us a bit about this series, and in particular, what inspired you to start writing it?
Well, I was very fortunate as a kid. When I was about 8 to 12 years old, I lived in France. My dad had been transferred to NATO. And when you live in Europe, you can hop in a car and drive through 5 countries if you have a mind to. In the second year, though, my parents wanted to see the Normandy war memorials because they lived through World War II and they clearly lost people. But the war was never discussed. When you're in an international French school for NATO kids and diplomatic corps, that was my first instruction from my mom. There was a war, Germany lost, you don't talk about it. So, okay, fine. So we had German, French, Dutch kids, and as all of our student friends. But so when we got to Normandy, I was somewhat stunned by thousands of little white crosses stretching to the horizons. And I just thought, there's something wrong here. And my mom was trying to exercise my poor math skills, adding and subtracting. As we stood in front of each cross, she asked, and how old was this one when he died? And they were all young, late teens and early 20s. And then she turned to another cross and said, and how old was this one? And the numbers were wrong. They didn't end in 1940, something or other. Mummy, the numbers are wrong. This guy had died in 1918, and his birth year had been in the late 1880s. And so my mom said, that's because he died in the First World War. And I was utterly flabbergasted. There were 2 world wars in the same place. And so we got into the car, and then we were driving off to Vimy Ridge, which is a fairly important monument to the thousands of Canadian people who had died at that battle. And something in me had enough. And I refused to get out of the car. And my parents must have thought I was having a childish sulk or something. But I felt this amazing, inarticulate sense of certainty that this was wrong. And I marvel at this where did this knowledge come from? And so it was a moment of awakening. And it took decades for me to get back to that and write about it. So the whole notion about war and passive resistance and non-cooperative sort of stuff, I learned about once we came back from Europe, but I could never solve it to my satisfaction. I have provisional sympathy for the nonviolent pacifism approach, but you have to choose your opponents fairly well, because people like Hitler or Stalin or Mao Zedong, they couldn't care less about noble sentiments. But the British were, Gandhi was amazingly successful in kicking the British out from India. And so, but still, they did not, the equation was incomplete. So in the end, decades later, the inspiration came to me, write about it. Write a novel about what would a pacifist, nonviolent city-state do to prepare for barbarian invasion coming in 6 months. And I thought, oh, okay, boom. And that's where City of Magicians started. It took me a very long time to write all 3 books. And the interesting thing about it was that it became enormous. My poor publisher said, listen, can you not cut this down a bit or divide it up? And it underwent, the manuscript was 1,200 pages, but it had taken me, I'll cut it short. It was about 15, 18 years writing the thing. But the interesting thing, it underwent, and I like to call it a literary mitosis. It was a cellular division that went, oh my goodness, it's a trilogy. And it divided incredibly neatly. And so it was sitting there waiting for me to uncover the fact that there was this natural division. So yeah, that's the long version of how I came to write The City of the Magicians.
Well, let's start with the first book, Threat. It's Threat. Within is book 2, and Quickening, book
Yes.
3. So I'd like to start with Threat, book 1. In particular, I want to talk about 2 things. We can take them in whichever order you would prefer, but I'd like to talk about sort of the setting and the world building around it. And then I'd like to talk about sort of the main characters we meet in book 1. Do you have a preference for which road we go down first?
Oh, we can do world building. That
Okay.
was a ton of fun. Yep.
Okay, good. Yeah, because set it up for us, because this, I imagine it's fictional. So you've created this world for us to reside in, but I imagine a lot of it will feel familiar in some ways. So let's talk about real inspirations you drew from, what fantastical elements you wanted to make sure were included, and how you ended up marrying them into this unique place.
Sure. Well, there's a good story about a Canadian author who wrote crime fiction, mystery series, and he bases it in Vancouver, and he has his a detective inspector going down the street and turning left. And the book got published. And then he got a letter in the old days when people sent letters from the Outer Hebridean Islands from someone who said, oh, you've made a mistake. You can't turn left on Cornwall Street. So I thought, oh my goodness. So that forced me, I thought it was a wonderful story, but it made me realize I have to do the same thing. So I drew a map, a very detailed map of the City of the Magicians, which the inhabitants just called the city. There is only one like us. So I have this map, and there's a map in each, slightly different in each of the 3 books, with different houses and buildings being highlighted. So it started from there, but I also wanted it to be sufficiently different. So I had to create a language that was based on glyph writing. They don't have an alphabet. So I was studying Chinese, ancient Mayan, and ancient Egyptian as pictorial languages, and have gone a certain distance in creating them, which was a ton of fun. And that also includes sign language, which is also strangely pictorial. So yeah, but the city-state as a pacifist, nonviolent place, they have a sacred spring, which sort of gives them a vaunted. It's like lures in a way, but they're quietly fleecing the pilgrims that come as well. They have a certain sense of quiet superiority. So, but the magic that they're known for is the magic that you and I experience on a daily basis. But if we're slightly more alert, to our existence, to our consciousness, we begin to spot things like, oh, I decided to walk down the street and go on the other side. And suddenly, oh, hey, I haven't seen you in 10 years. Now, if you trace back your breadcrumbs to just say, now, what made me decide to cross the street and meet someone I haven't seen in 10 years? Those are elements of what I like to call the sentience of reality, that we are wiser and smarter than we give ourselves credit for. And the citizens of the city of the magicians, they've caught on to this to a certain degree, but they're also getting lazy and complacent. So
Okay. Now, set in this setting, let's talk about the characters, because I imagine the setting does bring some pressures to bear on these characters and how they conduct themselves and the choices they make and the constraints within which they can operate. But if you don't mind, introduce us to a couple of the main characters, maybe a couple of your favorites, particularly ones we might follow then into later books.
right. Okay, the first one is Sass, and he's sort of a young scholar who's he's lost his parents. He's being raised by his aunt, and he's been selected by the council of the city council. And he's quite puzzled by this. And then it's announced that, oh, you are going to educate the barbarian with telepathic sendings. And he's just, what? You've made a mistake. And so he's just, okay, if I'm a citizen of the city, I will go along with this. But he ends up finding, without giving too much away, that he's being manipulated into this. And he is bait for the barbarian leader, who is still 6 months away. But underneath all this, the council, the head of the strategist heading the council realizes there's an underground movement plotting to collaborate with the same barbarian for their reasons. And he's having to think, my goodness, how do I expose these people and who are they? And so the second character is Lalia, who is looking for the lost manuscript of her lover, who has also disappeared. And she stumbles into this group, and she's faced with a dilemma, choose life or death. And so she says, okay, life. And she finds that she is compromising herself to a tremendous degree, and that struggles to keep her inner integrity alive as much as possible. And bit by bit, she realizes the degree to which this particular, it's called the fifth school, is trying to compromise the city for this underground movement's benefit.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So take us through, if you don't mind, a little bit more of the plot of book one. We understand that there's this overall theme of pacifism, nonviolence versus sort of brute force barbarianism that we could see on the horizon. Like that's
Right.
the clash. That's the setup that
Yeah.
we're expecting, and the tension that it creates. So, given that is coming at us, tell us a little bit more about the plot and sort of what everybody's running around doing as this disaster is coming towards them.
Right. We have the two factions, and bit by bit, they both work. Sass has this telepathic appearance in front of Purdu, who is the barbarian leader, and he's stunned. My goodness, this figure that's floating in the air, seemingly real, is saying, "We are expecting you, but you must come in peace, and this is not a place to pillage or damage or destroy, but we will accept you as a friend. Come and rest." Meanwhile, the underground movement says, "Hey, we can offer you something that will fulfill your heart's desire more than anything that you are battling for." And so the Purdu is faced with these two temptations.
So that just adds to his dilemma, I would imagine. Tell us a little bit about him. I guess he represents the villain.
Right.
Where sort of he's an obvious villain. Whether or not he actually is the villain, I guess maybe is the question. But tell us a little bit more about him and how you developed him as a character.
Well, as I said, I have professional sympathy with pacifism. So what do I know about barbarians? So, so I read things like Philippe de Ségur, he was a military adjutant with Napoleon, and he was beside Napoleon's side when Napoleon went into Russia and wrote an amazing book called Napoleon's Russian Campaign, which I would recommend for someone who is interested in military history. It's a classic, but it gives you an insight into what drives people to invade, rape, pillage, burn, destroy. And so Purdue also has this, but he is conflicted by the fact he's after something, and yet the city now presents itself with, oh my goodness, they have answers, and maybe I will find peace. But one of the things you don't find out until book two, that he is suffering from post-traumatic syndrome, and which he has caused himself. Very interesting thing happened with Alexander the Great when he finally burned Persepolis. He wept at his own destruction, and he never slept very properly after that, and he was quite tortured. But he brought it on himself because he was this military genius, and the people behind him said, "Hey, let's keep going." And then yeah, so barbarian motivations are an interesting thing to examine. And in order to stop them in their tracks, they must be stopped early because there are people that coagulate around such people and push them forward and until they are not themselves anymore.
Right, right. Interesting. Okay, so this is the setup in book one. Without too many spoilers, I'd like to talk about two and three in relation to sort of the arc for the series. You said the story broke down along these lines naturally. So I imagine as you were writing it, you had an idea of the story as a whole, all 1,200 pages of it.
Right. Yes.
So what is helpful for the reader to know about two and three, Within and Quickening, in relation to your plans or your idea for the story as a whole?
Okay. Book one sets up the two factions, and there seems to be success on the councils. They are able to expose, more or less, the second, the underground movement. And then Porter arrives in book two, and yeah, he's figuring out, yeah, there are two factions. This one is going after my heart. This one is going after my ambitions. Yeah. But this is what I want. And so compromise and coordination and has to go on all three. What would be the word? All three of them. So Porter, the council, the fifth school, they have to negotiate and make their way through. It's not easy
No.
for any of them, but because you want to maintain your integrity, and yet you have to compromise. So they can just say, keep the damage to a minimum. So, but they end up continuing the invasion, and some of the citizens join in the army of the Earth Scorching Wind, which is what Porter's military forces are called, and they continue south. And Sass, on the other hand, says, "Wait a second, what are you doing? You're compromising your citizenship." Meanwhile, the fifth school says, "Oh, we will be the capital of this empire," and so they're egging it on. So, and then a battle is you get the beginning moments of a battle at the end of book two, Within. So each book ends with sort of a cliffhanger, with a resolution at the same time. And book three is the aftermath, which no one is prepared for. And I don't want to give too much away, but the last chapter in book three absolutely stunned me. I had an ending sort of there, and when I sort of began mapping it out, I just said, "This is pretty tepid." And my little writing voice said, "Okay, now that you've got that on the way, write this." And I had one of those moments that any writer absolutely cherishes. You're possessed by the plot, by the characters, and you can write for 10 hours without breaking. And it's just, you're in an utterly amazing creative high. And I was in that. I think I wrote for 10 hours straight, writing that final chapter. And when I showed it to my partner, he said, "Oh, don't change a word." and I, oh my goodness, okay, great. And I didn't. It was, but then I had to go back, and this is what happened for the last 2 years of writing the thing. There was a 2-year re-editing to bring book one and two up to the standard of the last chapter of book three.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's talk a little bit about that part of it, the editing, because a lot of writers, and you may fall into this camp, a lot of writers really enjoy the writing part of it, the drafting, the
Like,
world building, the creating, the getting it down on the page, and the editing is not as much fun. Some people love the editing. Like it's work to get it down and then they just love the editing part. Which camp do you fall in? I would, if I had to guess, I would guess maybe you're in the former. But do
um,
you enjoy the editing? Is that
and I have to say I enjoy both.
mm,
It's very interesting to see the story emerge and have characters sort of pop up and say, okay, this I'm here and this is what I'm going to say. Just okay. And I listen to that. It's a very interesting process for the book writes itself. And then when I'm doing the editing, it was it strengthens the memory in such a way that you can say, okay, this is happening in book three, and yet the seed of it amazing was already there and I didn't know it at the time.
right?
And so I will go back and forth. And there's a very interesting knitting together that is very interesting to observe. It's like what I don't know how to describe it. It's like watching a garden grow and you've planted certain things and you think, oh my goodness, this is doing really well, but perhaps it should be in this bed. So you dig something up and put it over there. But the book had more or less settled into place, but the fine tuning of it was a distinct pleasure, no
Yeah.
question.
I
Yeah.
imagine that was to edit the three books together was probably a challenge because that's a lot of information to keep in your head at any one time.
Yep.
1,200 pages worth of
Yeah.
material
Yeah.
to
Yep.
hold in your head. A lot of people, writing a series, they do book one, they edit it, and it's out, and then they're locked in with
Absolutely. Yep.
with book one. I guess the benefit for what you're doing is, or what you've done is, you have the ability to fix things in book
Yes.
one to
Yep.
help you in book three, which a lot of people don't have. But that's still a lot of information to edit all
Yep.
three
It was an
books.
excellent exercise in memory, and
Mm.
it sharpened the memory. There's an interesting thing that I love. Socrates once said, "Write nothing down." Oh, and he said that because the moment you write something down, your memory begins to fail. I thought, ooh, right. It's something I've actually studied, and it's actually part of the city culture. Speed memory, speed reading, and speed math. These are educational things that everyone can learn, and if you apply them, they are they are tremendous aids. So it's like people who are now beginning to say there's an interesting study that came out or reportage last week about students are saying, I'm turning off AI. It's making me lazy and I'm not writing the way I used to. And AI cannot write the way I do. And if I ask a question, they don't know the answer to it, it makes it up. No. So it's very interesting to see students are reporting the fact they're turning it off. So in the same way that Socrates is saying, write nothing down
Mm.
and equivalence. Anyway, so yeah, and the editing process was very interesting that way. And it tightened me up as a writer. And it made me very alert to, so that's why I'm working on books four, five, and six simultaneously.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so that was
Yeah.
going to be my next question is where do you go from here? And I was going to say, do you start something completely new in a whole different world, or do you stick with the world that you've already created?
Well, that was the interesting thing with the last chapter in book three. It was such an amazing chapter. It opened up the portal for the fact, oh my
Mm,
goodness, it's not over. Some books four, five, and six are um, it's almost as if books one, two, and three are the prologue
oh,
or
interesting.
the prequel to what's going to happen in four, five, and six. It was quite surprising for me,
Oh, so that
and
was
quite
not part of your original plan. Four, five, and
no,
six were, oh,
yeah.
interesting.
So the book has the writing has grabbed me by the throat and thrown
Yeah.
me on the ground and just saying, "I'm not finished with you yet."
I was going to say, what a gift that the last chapter of book three gave you this whole new trilogy to write. But I
Yeah,
appreciate your analogy that it was more like a royal beating
Oh
perhaps.
yeah, but it was a portal that just sucked me in. Just saying, it ain't over till the last magician sings. Uh,
Oh, and they'll tell you when that happens, I imagine.
yeah,
When
yeah.
you get to the
Well,
end of six, who knows?
yeah. Well, I do. I have written an epilogue, and where that fits into anything. There, I mean, I'm 74 now, and I have 20 years left, perhaps. Both my parents lived into their 90s, so that means I have to write a lot.
A little bit faster maybe this time
Yeah,
around. But now that you
exactly.
know what you're doing and your world is there,
Exactly.
right?
And yeah,
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I'm curious, and I've asked a number of authors this question, particularly ones that write sci-fi and fantasy, because it seems like when you create something that's unique or different, or that feels a bit foreign to what we see every day, it creates a space for people to consider bigger questions and issues that maybe
absolutely.
are difficult to discuss or consider or spend time on or think about critically in the real world. So
Right.
I'm curious what sort of messages or takeaways or questions you wanted your readers to contemplate, and were the ones that you were thinking about maybe as you set out to tell the story the same ones that reveal themselves now that the trilogy is done? Did that stay the same, or did those change as your story changed?
Actually, it got deeper, which was
Mm.
sort of a nice surprise for me as well, because Sass and one or two other people in the council began to realize in book three that, oh my goodness, there's something much larger going on here. And what are we missing? And as the city undergoes this tremendous crisis in the end, while maintaining its pacifist approach, they're under the gun. And not that there's a gun, um, but and it's forcing me to realize, my goodness, what have we missed? What have we done here that has invited this really rather horrendous crisis that is in book three? And so when a reader picks up book one, I always wanted that they would accept themselves. You are a citizen of this place. That you are a citizen of the City of Magicians, that you are knowledgeable, capable, perceptive, and also aware of the fate and the experience that you create comes under the heading of magic. And magic is merely something that is a quick um, a definition of life itself. And if you begin to take a look at it more clearly, as these people should and used to, they realize, yes, we are magicians like everyone else. There are no exceptions. Some of us sleep more in our life. Some are slightly more awake. Some of us merely stir in our sleep, realizing, oh, what's going on here? And yet they ask the question and they don't pursue it and go back to sleep again. So at the end near the end of book three, Sass and a few others just say, what the heck is going on here?
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, were you always a writer? I mean, this was something big to tackle.
Mhm.
Three books at the start,
Right.
and now another trilogy on top of that. Did you always want to be a writer, or was this something you discovered later in life?
I always liked writing. It
Mm.
was all very private. I'm glad none of my juvenilia it has gone the way of decay and everything else. But I was writing bits of poetry when I was about in early teens and all that sort of stuff. And then reading certain books would also say, "Oh my goodness, look at this! I would love to be able to do something similar," and tried, and it always fizzled out. And then in grade nine, a lot of writers will remember. This teacher turned me on. Um, in those days, we had English class every day of the week. But our teacher, Mrs. King, she's probably long gone now, said the thing that she described every day was going to be different. Monday was going to be competition. Um, oh, not competition, composition. And I thought, oh, and he would mark never more than a page and a half, so short stories or anecdotes or whatever. And I thought, oh, it's permission to write. I was just, oh, this is fantastic. I love English. And then Fortunately, I started writing for many years later. I started writing for magazines, and because I wrote fairly good copy, the editor just say, "Oh my goodness, I don't have to do any work here. You can write whatever you want," which was a lovely vote of confidence. And I wrote a couple of little novels of things I was interested in. One of which was the restaurant business. I met a couple of chefs, and I said, "My goodness, what an amazing life you need to say." Oh, it's not easy. And I got to interview chefs and their entire staff and waiters to dishwashers and whatnot. And I began writing a novel about that I thought was pretty good. But and then finally the idea of writing something about pacifism and how do you maintain your integrity in the face of real opposition, and how do you not compromise it, but turn it and just say there are alternative points of view that don't necessitate the violence, the cruelty, the death, the mayhem, all that sort of stuff. And that, as I said, that consumed me for a good 20 years.
Wow. Okay.
Oh, and
When
the
you
other thing too, sorry, the other thing too, I'm a gardener, which just gets me away from the computer, gets away from writing. And so I was asked to write gardening columns, which I did for about 11 years for two separate journals.
So where do your ideas hatch? Like where do you mold them over? Is it when you're gardening, when you're physically doing something else, do you find the ideas come, or is it a case of the ideas come as you start writing or in quiet time? Like
All of the above, all
really
of the above,
all the
and
time
all
ideas
the
all the
time, yeah.
time?
So I carry a little reporter's notepad with me at all times. When I go outside, I have to slip it in my back pocket, or I have it beside my pillow at night, or when I'm doing my stretching, it's right beside me at all times. Just, oh, hey, Lalia should be saying this, or Sash should be doing this, and blah, blah, blah. So it's always there. And I guess I'm on to pad number 35, 36. I can't remember now. Um, and I've developed my own shorthand, which is also based on the glyphic
Oh, interesting.
thing that, because I started taking notes verbatim when I was getting my degrees. And, and it's very quick to write stuff down. And then I go back to my notes and insert it where it should be in the manuscript and go from there. But yeah, I read a lot of nonfiction to get a sense of what real things have happened and how people remember them. So, as I was saying before, the Napoleon's Russian campaign was a very interesting look into how an invading power thinks. And he was not well at the time, Napoleon, but he made an interesting observation that he saw it as a chess game. And it was reported that, my God, he's not sitting down to the chessboard. I can't see my chessboard. And there's the Tsar, who was not playing a chess game. He was fighting for his country and his life. But it was interesting how Napoleon saw it that way. I'm also reading memoirs from the courts of Europe. There's a very interesting series that came out in the 1880s that got reprinted right up until about the First World War. And I've got three different editions of it. But one of them currently is the memoirs of um, oh, he was the Count of, I'm not going to remember his name now. Anyway, everyone knew he was writing. He wrote during the latter part of Louis XIV and the early regency of Louis XV. And he was at court and fairly well positioned. And the Count of Saint Simon, and that's how it reads, but it's pronounced Le Comte de Saint-Simon. And he wrote this amazing memoir that no one knew when he was writing until it got published. And they were scandalized. My God, how could you possibly write about this? And it's very interesting, all the jostling and fighting at court and this, that, and how a monarch, a good one, can control the factions. Very interesting dynamics. And how with a sense of play and yet say, oh, you did this for me. Okay, I will give you a title. Or, you shouldn't have done that. I can remove you from court. So they're very interesting, very tight dynamics if the court is well, it functions. And you always have to be cognizant of the possibility of plots and conspiracies and all that sort of stuff.
Right.
It ain't a pretty sight, but it's a fascinating read. Um, so biographies and memoirs are really interesting. An interesting one was she was a painter at the court of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. She became a very good friend of Marie Antoinette, and she painted lots of very competent portraits of Marie Antoinette and their children. And she had to flee when the revolution happened. And she ended up in Russia with the French diaspora that ended up there and was at the court of, was it Catherine the Great? Maybe it was Catherine the Great. And she was writing about all these sorts of things. Her memoirs are a fascinating read. So a painter, a woman painter of some renown at the court of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette. She wrote her memoir.
Wow.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Did you have any idea when you started this book, when you had this idea and you're like, okay, let me sit down, see if I've got a book here. Did you have any idea how much research you would be doing, how much you would be reading, how much you would be studying? These campaigns and heads of state.
Yeah. They were wonderful distractions on one level because a lot of this I've not used. Mm. But the whole immersive thing of the research helps sort of, okay, well, if that can happen, this can happen in the series. So there is a curious search for legitimacy. That here I am writing fiction and yet being inspired by nonfiction. It made me feel safe.
Oh, that's a very good point. Well, it sounds like you're going to be busy for a while. Books 4, 5, and 6, I imagine, will probably not be shorter or quicker or simpler. They're probably just going to get more complicated.
Right.
But in the meantime, if people want to learn more about you and the first 3 books and things you have going on, etc., where can they go to find you and that information?
Okay, petergribble.com is the website. I have an Instagram account, which I'm very loath to be attentive to. It's Peter Gribble 3. I'm very slowly learning how to add things to it, so it'll be very slow on that level. You can get the books at Amazon. You probably have to put my full name in there, Threat Peter Gribble, because there are different books that also apparently have that title as well. And and also if you happen to be in Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada, they are also, all 3 books are available. Threat, Within, and Quickening are available at the Robson Chapters Indigo store on Robson Street near Burrard.
Excellent. Well, Peter, thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. And I want to wish you luck with the City of Magicians series. Books 1, 2, and 3, Threat, Within, and Quickening are out now. Good luck with 4, 5, and 6. We will all eagerly be awaiting those. Congratulations on everything you've accomplished so far, and best of luck with the rest of your writing journey.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, and happy reading.
The Bookshop at the End of the Internet is a podcast dedicated to helping book lovers discover new authors. Like any good bookshop, this podcast features a wide variety of books by the equally varied and interesting authors who felt compelled to write them. This podcast gives you a chance to meet these wonderful writers and discover your next must-read book. Listen to the authors describe their books and tell you their stories in their own words. My interviews feature books from all genres and authors from all walks of life, including those who are indie published, as well as those published by small presses and large publishing houses. Looking for unique, not so easy to find books for yourself, a friend, or a book club? Tune into this podcast and find your newest favorite author, or maybe a soon-to-be bestseller. This podcast, like all the best bookshops, is filled with all kinds of books and all kinds of authors. Tune in, browse around, find a new author, and discover a new favorite book. You never know what treasures you might find in the Bookshop at the End of the Internet.